We have breaking news out of the White House. Brian?
There is a report that President Biden is going to swap Brittney Griner for arms dealer Victor Boot.
Moments ago, standing together with her wife Sherelle in the Oval Office, I spoke with Brittney Griner. She's safe. She's on a plane. She's on her way home.
This is such wonderful news, such happy news for her wife, for the family, friends, loved ones, especially in this holiday season.
Many people say this was a good faith gesture from both the Russians and the United States, but who we're not hearing about is the former Marine Paul Whelan. Right now, we cannot confirm he's involved in this prisoner swap, so people are going to be talking about that right now, guys.
The release, the swap that took place at the Abu Dhabi airport in the UAE.
This ends what has been quite the saga over the past several months. This is a one-for-one swap, if you will. There had been an effort earlier to try to get U.S. Marine Paul Whelan, who was imprisoned in Russia, out as well. That doesn't seem to be the case.
After 10 long months, Brittney Griner is coming home. This all stems from Griner, per the Russian court system, bringing vape cartridges containing hashish oil through a Moscow airport. The following video of Griner going through security was released and published by ABC News in March of 2022. She was on her way to play in Russia because...
In Russia, big-name players can bring in 4 times the maximum WNBA base salary.
Nearly 90 out of 144 WNBA roster players spent time playing overseas during their offseason, wrote The Guardian in 2018. Some players can make $1 million or more, nearly quadruple what they can make as a base salary in the WNBA. At the time, Evelyn Farkas, a former Pentagon official, specifically the ex-deputy assistant secretary of defense for Russia and Ukraine from 2012 to 15, explained the sitch.
We don't know whether she actually did bring these, hash vaping items into Russia or not. The Russians are notorious for planting drugs and other things on Americans.
Human rights lawyer Gisunia wrote, the timing is suspicious. Griner was detained in February during Russia's preparations to invade Ukraine. Then the news about her detention was concealed. Russia released the info only later at one of the highest points of tension between the U.S. and Russia in decades. We also have no independent verification that the cannabis oil charges the Russians have leveled at her are true.
But
Former WNBA star Lisa Leslie would later tell us,
we were told was to not make a big fuss about it so that they could not use her as a pawn, so to speak, in this situation in war. So to make it like it's not that important, or don't make it where like free Brittney and we start this campaign. And then it becomes something that they could use
as leverage.
That's what we were told.
The Nation's Dave Zirin printed in his piece. The U.S. State Department and whatever private attorneys or negotiators are involved have called for silence, no grassroots movement, no international uproar, no upsetting what they clearly see as a delicate situation. Their strategy has brought us to a point where Griner is facing years at a labor camp. They need to switch strategies. Griner's detention comes at the most dangerous moment in U.S.-Russia relations since the Cuban Missile Crisis, wrote the New York Times.
All that being said, a lot in the public, they say if this were an NBA star like Brittney, that it would be daily news. Do you think a gender issue is at play here?
I mean, when is it not?
The WNBA became more and more vocal in their calls to bring BG home, with big names like Nneka Ogwumike and WNBA Commissioner Kathy Engelbert leading the charge. Dr. Jeremy Levitt, law professor at Florida A&M University, spoke with USA Today.
She's a fairly well-known figure here, certainly more well-known than the 2 gentlemen that are locked up in Russia right now. And so she represents a different kind of prize.
Russian state TV released very few images of Griner to the masses, which kept the flow of information intact out of Moscow. Peter Maggs, Russian law expert at the University of Illinois, gave his insights.
We don't know what really happened. And one thing I find a little worrisome is this extension of her preliminary holding from 2 months to 3 months because you have to go to a higher authority to get it lengthened. You're talking about 5 years, not jail time, but a labor camp.
As this unfolded, Human Rights Watch wrote LGBTQ people there have long faced threats, bullying, abuse inside their families, and discrimination. But the 2013 gay propaganda law has increased that social hostility. Russia's gay propaganda law is a classic example of political homophobia. In July, Griner pled guilty to the charges against her, one that, if following along, was not surprising. The guilty plea was a route to a potentially more lenient sentence in a country that has a conviction rate that is higher than 97%, meaning no matter if she admitted guilt, she was, in all likelihood, going to be found guilty. That same month, Brittney Griner's wife spoke with CBS.
I will not be quiet anymore. I will find that balance of, harm versus help in pushing our government to do everything that's possible, because being quiet, they are not moving, they are not doing anything. And so, my wife is struggling, and we have to help her.
Journalist TJ Quinn wrote the guilty plea was a strategy to help facilitate a prisoner swap that could bring Griner home. And it also was a recognition that there was no way she was going to be acquitted.
WNBA star Brittney Griner reached out to President Biden from inside a Russian prison.
She is on trial, facing 10 years in prison for alleged drug smuggling. In a handwritten letter to the president, she wrote she's terrified she might be there forever. She went on to say, quote, "Please don't forget about me and other American detainees. Please do all you can to bring us home."
Around this time, the name Victor Bout started to gain steam.
This is the man nicknamed the Merchant of Death. Convicted arms trafficker Victor Bout, currently serving a 25-year sentence in the United States. The Biden administration has offered to return him as part of a proposed deal for 2 Americans the United States says are wrongfully detained in Russia, Brittney Griner and Paul Whelan. Bout is a former Soviet military officer who's been accused of using front companies to funnel Soviet-era weapons into conflict zones like Afghanistan, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, even working with U.S. government contractors in Iraq.
He's a dangerous person. He was one of the most prolific arms dealers in the world. He was convicted in a U.S. federal court in New York of conspiracy to kill Americans.
In August, she was sentenced to 9 years in prison. Quinn wrote the conclusion should allow negotiations for a prisoner swap to accelerate. Her appeal in October would be rejected by the Russian court system. Then, in November,
developing story to SportsCenter, Brittney Griner's legal team says that she is in the process of being transferred to a Russian penal colony, but they don't know where she is or where she's heading. Russian penal colonies are known for having far harsher conditions than the Moscow jail where Griner had been since she was detained in February.
While conditions vary among Russian penal colonies, political prisoners are often placed in harsh conditions where they can be subjected to solitary confinement or punitive stays in psychiatric units, the State Department's Human Rights Report says.
The worst thing in penal colony is witnessing deaths of others around you and not being able to do anything. People die from hard physical labor and in inability to access medical treatment that they need, but you're just another prisoner and you can't do anything about it. You just have to witness this cruelty and know that something like that can happen with you as well.
Russian law also allows forced labor in penal colonies, and in some cases, inmates have been tortured to death, the report says. There also are reports of prisoner authorities recruiting inmates to abuse other inmates, the report adds, which brings us to today.
After months of being unjustly detained in Russia, held under intolerable circumstances, Brittney will soon be back in the arms of her loved ones, and she should have been there all along.
Many will point to at least 3 more American detainees, including Paul Whelan, not being involved in the swap. Via investigative reporter TJ Quinn once more, sources saying the U.S. had been pushing to bring Griner and Paul Whelan home together, but Russian officials said it's the deal or nothing. U.S. decided to make the deal. Whelan's family says they understand, and the White House did the right thing.